Indiana holds more ancient secrets than most people realize. Hidden chambers, strange carvings, lost villages, and silent earthworks sit tucked into forests, cliffs, and river valleys across the state. Each site hints at cultures that vanished long before written history. These mysteries invite you to look closer and wonder what stories still lie buried beneath Indiana's landscape. The Brown County Stone Chambers. If you hike deep enough into Brown County, far from the cabins and art studios the place is known for, you'll eventually reach a landscape that feels older than everything around it. The hills get steeper, the forest gets quieter, and every now and then you catch a glimpse of something that doesn't look natural. Flat stones set at angles that don't match the bedrock, or a dark opening half hidden under roots and leaf litter. That's where the stories about the Brown County Stone Chambers begin, and if you've never heard of them before, you're not alone. Most people who visit the area never realize they're walking right past one of Indiana's quietest archaeological mysteries. These chambers are small, stone-built structures tucked into hillsides or buried beneath decades of forest growth. They sit in places that don't make sense for barns, root cellars, or pioneer storage rooms. They're usually built with careful placement, tight joints, and a strange sense of symmetry. When you stand near one, you feel like you've stumbled into something that wasn't meant to be found, at least not easily. Local hikers talk about them in hushed tones. Some think they were Native American ceremonial chambers. Others believe they're the remains of early settlers who experimented with stone construction before switching to wood. Then there's the fringe crowd, who insist the chambers are much older, maybe thousands of years older, pointing to unusually heavy lintel stones and the way some chambers face solstice sunrises. Most of these claims are impossible to prove, but the uncertainty is part of the charm. The first thing you notice when you get close to one of these structures is how out of place it feels. Brown County's geology is rough and fractured, but it doesn't naturally stack itself into doorways. Most chambers are built from sandstone slabs arranged like miniature passage tombs, with an entrance that dips into the earth and a roof that feels a little too heavy for such small walls. Even after all the years of erosion and collapse, some chambers still hold their shape. When you open your phone's flashlight and shine it into one, the air that drifts out is cool and still. The smell is a mix of soil, stone, and old leaves, more like you're entering a forgotten hideaway than a natural cave. Inside, the spaces are tight, barely enough for a crouched person. There's no sign of long-term habitation. No fire pits, no storage marks, just quiet stone. That's where the questions start. If these chambers weren't homes and they weren't cellars, then what were they? Some archaeologists think they might have been used for short-term shelter by early settlers, especially those moving through the hills before the land was fully surveyed. But most pioneer records don't mention anything like them, and the construction style doesn't match known frontier techniques. Frontier stonework was usually rough, functional, and done with whatever rocks were nearby. These chambers feel deliberate. There's also the issue of weathering. Some of the stones show erosional patterns that suggest they've been in their current position for far longer than the pioneer era. A few researchers point out that the chambers resemble structures found in the northeast New England root cellars that later turned out not to be root cellars at all, but possibly older ritual sites. It raises the uncomfortable possibility that Indiana might have similar structures with equally uncertain origins. Of course, the locals have their own explanations. One story says that an early hermit lived in the Brown County hills and carved small chambers as a kind of spiritual retreat. Another claims Civil War deserters dug hideouts to avoid military patrols. A third theory argues that moonshiners used the chambers as fermentation spaces, but the sizes don't really match, and there's no obvious ventilation system. These theories pop up because people want answers, and when something doesn't fit neatly into the historical record, the imagination fills in the blanks. A few hikers swear they've found alignments. One chamber supposedly faces sunrise on the summer solstice, though no official survey has confirmed it. Another chamber's walls point toward cardinal directions, a little too precisely to be coincidence. If this were New England or the Southwest, archaeologists might be more open to ceremonial interpretations. But Indiana isn't known for stone-built prehistoric sites, so any idea that pushes beyond the conventional timeline gets dismissed pretty fast. Still, the mystery remains, because nobody has studied these chambers enough to settle the question. Most sit on private land, or in areas where excavation would be complicated. And since the structures aren't flashy, no carvings, no artifacts, no dramatic architecture, they're easy for researchers to overlook. They're just stone rooms in the woods. Simple, quiet, and oddly persistent. There's also something eerie about how they're placed. Many sit in locations that aren't convenient. They're halfway up slopes, tucked against ravines, or buried in thick forest long before the region became a park. You get the sense that whoever built them wasn't planning for ease of access. It feels more like they needed privacy, or solitude, or a setting that matched a specific purpose. When you hike the trails and stumble across one, that's when you really feel the age of it. The forest breathes around you, and for a moment you stand in a place where the past hasn't fully disappeared. The chamber doesn't explain itself. It just sits there, gathering moss and fallen branches, letting the mystery linger. Some hikers say they've felt odd shifts in temperature around the chambers. A few have reported hearing faint echoes when they speak near the entrance, even when the chamber is too small to create real acoustic effects. One person described a sudden feeling of being watched, though that could be the thick woods closing in. Brown County has a way of playing tricks on you when the canopy gets dense and the light gets low. There's no evidence of anything supernatural here, but the atmosphere is heavy in a way that's hard to describe. It's the same feeling you get in old cemeteries or forgotten homesteads, the sense that human hands shaped this place a long time ago and the memory hasn't faded completely. If you go looking for the chambers today, some are easy to miss. Leaves and branches hide entrances. Fallen trees block old paths, but the structures that remain are still strong enough to make you pause. They haven't collapsed the way a pioneer cellar would. They're more resilient than you'd expect from improvised frontier construction. That durability sparks more questions than answers. So what's the truth? At this point, nobody can say for sure. They could be early settler experiments in stonework. They could be storage rooms for something we haven't identified yet. They could be the remnants of a forgotten community that passed through Indiana long before the landscape was mapped. Or they could be part of an older pattern of Midwestern stone architecture that's been mostly erased by time, weather, and development. Whatever they were, they left just enough behind to make you wonder. If you ever visit Brown County and stumble across one of these chambers, take a moment before you step closer. Listen to the forest. Feel the cool air by the entrance. Think about how many seasons have washed over those stones. In a place known for painters and weekend cabins, it can be strange to realize there are still corners of the land that hold secrets from long before modern Indiana existed. Wherever the mystery leads, the chambers are still out there, quiet, weathered, and waiting for someone curious enough to look twice. The sacred circles beneath Geist Reservoir. If you spend enough time around Geist Reservoir, you start to hear the same rumor from different people that somewhere under all that water lies a set of ancient circles, older than the dam, older than the farms that once filled the valley, maybe even older than the earliest mapped settlements in central Indiana. Most folks call them the sacred circles, though nobody can agree on who built them, what they were used for, or why they ended up forgotten beneath a lake built for modern suburban life. It's one of those local mysteries that lives in the space between archaeology and whispered hearsay, where half-remembered surveys and odd features buried under silt create just enough evidence to keep the story alive. Standing on the shoreline today, it's hard to imagine anything ancient hiding beneath the surface. Geist is busy with boats in the summer, anglers at dawn, and joggers following the trails that wind around the water. Everything about the place feels modern, polished, and carefully managed. But when the reservoir was first surveyed in the 1930s, engineers supposedly documented several circular earthworks, structures they didn't fully understand but noted in their early planning maps. Those maps aren't easy to find today, and some people insist they never existed. Others say they were quietly archived to avoid delays in construction. Whatever the truth is, the mystery begins long before the water rose. Long before Geist Reservoir existed, the valley was a wide, rolling landscape dotted with natural springs and stretches of rich soil. Archaeologists know that indigenous groups lived along the White River and its tributaries for thousands of years. The land was fertile, and the river networks made it easy to move from one region to another. If you look at a map of known mound sites across Indiana, you'll notice something interesting. Many of them cluster near waterways. Rivers were lifelines, and ceremonial spaces were often close by. So when people say there were circular earthworks in the Geist Valley before it flooded, that idea isn't far-fetched. Circular mounds and ring-shaped designs appear in many indigenous cultures across the Midwest. Hopewell, Adena, and Fort Ancient, especially, these weren't random piles of earth. They were planned, measured, and aligned. Some were burial sites. Some were ceremonial gathering places. Others were astronomical observatories that tracked solstice sunrises and seasonal cycles. What makes the Geist story particularly intriguing is how often the old-timers mention more than one circle. In local accounts, it's never just a single mound. It's a set, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, arranged with surprising symmetry. A few people described them as rings the size of barns, though that's a pretty loose measurement. Others talked about shallow embankments that looked too round and too tidy to be natural. The details shift depending on who you ask, but they always come back to the same idea: someone designed them intentionally. When construction crews began clearing farmland for the dam project, some workers said they found stones arranged in arcs beneath the soil. One man, according to a family story, tried to sketch the layout because he couldn't believe how perfect the curve was. But like most personal anecdotes from that era, the sketch is long gone. The worker has passed on, and all we're left with is a story told by his grandson. If any archaeologist visited the area before the reservoir filled, their reports never made it into public archives. There was pressure to build quickly, and the 1930s weren't known for thorough cultural preservation. Indiana has lost more ancient sites to farming and development than most people realize. Once construction deadlines hit, earth was moved rapidly, the land was reshaped, and whatever sat in the path of the rising water probably disappeared with little ceremony. But despite the lack of official documentation, the mystery didn't vanish. It resurfaced in the 1980s when low water levels exposed parts of the reservoir floor near the back coves. Anglers noticed odd circular impressions beneath the silt, shallow, wide, and strangely consistent. One man described seeing a perfect ring of darker soil, almost like something had once pressed down the earth evenly all the way around. Another insisted he saw an arc of compacted clay that reminded him of mound remnants he'd visited in southern Ohio. These sightings were brief, and the impressions vanished again when the water rose, but they added fuel to the story. Divers have talked about similar formations. Most won't go on record, and their descriptions vary, but a few patterns show up again and again. They say the circles are big, bigger than you'd expect for a simple fire pit or settler structure. They say the ground feels unnaturally flat inside some of them, almost like it was intentionally leveled. And they say that even though the reservoir is full of debris from old farms, fences, and foundations, the shapes they've seen don't match anything man-made from the pioneer period. One diver claimed he found 2 circles about 100 feet apart, aligned almost perfectly east to west. When asked why he never filmed them, he admitted visibility in Geist is terrible, even with a good light. The bottom is mostly mud, and silt hangs in the water like smoke. You can see shapes only for a moment before they disappear again into the dark. It's not the kind of place where you get clear photos. Most dives are more guesswork than exploration. There's also a theory that the circles weren't earthworks at all, but natural features. Some geologists say the valley may have formed shallow rings from old water patterns or glacial activity, but that explanation doesn't sit right with locals who saw the land before it flooded. They insist the shapes were too regular, too round, and too deliberate to be geological accidents. Nature is beautiful, but it rarely forms perfect circles in the soil. The mystery takes on a heavier tone when you think about what's buried under the reservoir. Entire homesteads, barns, small foundations, and even parts of old roads still sit down there, preserved in mud. Ghost towns disappear into lakes all the time, and Indiana has its share. But the idea that something prehistoric, something ceremonial or sacred, might also be submerged makes Geist feel different. It's not just a recreational reservoir. It's a landscape layered with history, sealed beneath thousands of gallons of water. When you stand on the shore in the evening, when the wind is low and the water smooths out, it's easy to drift into the idea that something ancient is resting below. You don't feel it in a spooky way, more in a quiet, contemplative way, as if time hasn't entirely erased what came before. The surface reflects the sky, but what's beneath it remains hidden, like a page of history no one bothered to turn. Today, there's no official acknowledgement of the circles, no markers, no archaeological digs, no preserved documentation. Just a handful of memories, a few low-water sightings, and people who swear the formations were real. Maybe the circles were ceremonial, maybe they marked seasons, or maybe they were something we haven't identified yet. If they're still intact, they're buried under layers of silt and decades of reservoir life. And unless water levels drop dramatically someday, they'll probably stay that way. Still, the mystery sticks with you. When you walk the quiet trails around Geist, or watch the fog roll across the surface at sunrise, you can't help but imagine the land before the water. You picture the circles in the open air, surrounded by forest and prairie, used by people who understood the rhythms of the earth in ways we've mostly forgotten. And even though the reservoir covers everything now, the idea that these sacred shapes still sit down there, silent, submerged, and untouched, makes the place feel deeper than a modern lake should. If you ever visit Geist with that in mind, the water suddenly looks different. It becomes a shield protecting something ancient, or maybe a curtain hiding something we were never meant to see clearly again. Either way, the sacred circles beneath the reservoir remain one of Indiana's quietest, most overlooked mysteries, and they're still down there, waiting under the surface. The mysterious carvings at Hemlock Cliffs. If you've ever walked the trails around Hemlock Cliffs in southern Indiana, you know the place has its own mood. The air feels cooler, the cliffs rise like walls around you, water drips from ledges even in dry seasons, and the whole spot feels tucked away from the rest of the world. It's the kind of landscape that makes you slow down without really thinking about it. But once you get deep enough into the gorge, you start noticing the small carved shapes on the sandstone lines, grooves, strange symbols, and marks that don't match the rest of the natural erosion. That's where the mystery begins. The carvings aren't obvious at first. They're faint, worn down by time, and scattered in places where most hikers walk right past without looking. But once you see the first set, your eyes adjust, and suddenly you start spotting more little cuts in the rock that almost look like someone was trying to leave a message. Some are only a few inches long. Others stretch across entire slabs like someone once had a plan and a lot of patience. And the more you look, the more you start to wonder, who carved these, and what were they trying to say? There's no clear answer. The official explanations stay pretty vague. The sandstone here erodes easily, so some marks could be natural, but not all of them. Some lines run straight and true in a way that makes you stop. A few seem to form patterns, circles, ladders, spiral-like shapes, and rows of gouges that don't match normal weathering. These marks feel like someone was here a long time ago, leaving behind symbols that once meant something. Archaeologists point out that indigenous people lived in this region for thousands of years. The cliffs would have been a shelter, a lookout, and a place of retreat. The landscape itself almost invites ceremony. It's easy to imagine ancient people carving small symbols into the walls during rituals, or using the soft stone to etch reminders of stories and seasonal cycles. But that's all guesswork. There's no confirmed record of who put the carvings there. The marks are too weathered for firm dating, and the area has been visited for centuries by settlers, surveyors, travelers, and curious explorers. Anyone could have added to them. Still, the location makes you think. Many of the carvings sit high on ledges or tucked into shadowed recesses that require real effort to reach. Some are on ceilings where you'd have to crouch inside a natural alcove. Others are arranged in places where the light hits just right at certain times of day. It doesn't feel random, it feels intentional. There's one carving people talk about more than the others, a triangle shape with a vertical line running through the center. Some hikers say it looks like an arrow pointing upward. Others think it resembles a basic human figure. A few insist it's a directional marker, pointing toward a now hidden trail or shelter. Whatever it is, the triangle sits in a recessed nook where rain doesn't wash over it much. That's probably why it survived so well. When you stand in front of it, the carving is just clear enough to suggest purpose and just rough enough to blur any certainty. A different carving looks like a long horizontal groove with shorter lines branching off. If you stretch your imagination, it resembles a primitive map, almost like someone was marking ridge lines or water routes. But then again, sandstone cracks naturally in straight seams, so maybe it's nothing more than geology playing tricks on people who want the mystery to be real. That's the tricky part with Hemlock Cliffs. The rock is soft enough that a single season of wind, water, or frost can reshape a surface. You could carve something clean and visible one year and watch it fade into an unrecognizable smear the next. So even if these marks were made by ancient people, what we see today might only be a ghost of the original design. Some locals swear the carvings are evidence of much older cultures, groups that lived here long before the well-documented mound-building societies came along. They'll point to faint spirals or zigzag lines and say they match symbols found in caves across the Midwest. They'll talk about how the cliffs share certain features with ancient ceremonial sites in Kentucky and Tennessee, but none of it has been proven. The carvings at Hemlock Cliffs are too incomplete, too weathered, and too scattered to form a clear picture. That's what makes them mysterious. They hint at meaning without revealing it. You'll also hear stories from hikers who claim the carvings activate the place. They say the cliffs feel different once you notice the marks. Some describe a shift in the atmosphere, like the forest suddenly goes quieter or the air gets heavier. It's probably just the effect of paying closer attention, but I get where they're coming from. The gorge has a stillness that feels almost deliberate. When you stand beneath those tall walls and run your fingers over the carvings, it's hard not to get pulled into the past for a moment. One of the strangest theories is that the carvings might represent an early form of tally system, someone marking hunts, seasons, or lunar cycles. A few of the lines do appear in groups, spaced evenly like someone was counting. It's the kind of thing that could easily be part of indigenous tradition, especially if families camped here for generations. The cliffs would have been a natural gathering point, sheltered from storms, with fresh water nearby and plenty of game in the surrounding forest. A very different theory suggests the carvings were made by early settlers. Pioneers often passed through this region, and many of them carved initials, dates, or simple symbols on rock walls as they moved west. But the carvings at Hemlock Cliffs don't look like initials. They don't look like names, dates, hearts, crosses, or Christian marks, things you commonly see in pioneer graffiti. Instead, they look older, more abstract, and more tied to the landscape. There's also the physical experience of finding them. You duck under ledges, squeeze through narrow openings, and follow faint footpaths along the cliff walls. Every time you lean in close to inspect a carving, you notice something else, another groove hidden behind a tuft of moss, a symbol half eroded into the stone, or a mark in a place where no bored hiker would bother carving. The search becomes part of the mystery. Today, the cliffs are protected, and carving into them is illegal, which helps preserve what's left. But the older carvings remain unstudied. There's no sign explaining them, no plaques, no official names for the shapes. You're left alone with your own interpretation, and somehow that feels appropriate. It keeps the mystery alive without forcing a single explanation. If you visit Hemlock Cliffs early in the morning, when the sun is still low and the forest is waking up, you'll see light spill across the rock in patches. Some carvings only appear when the sun hits them at a particular angle. Others show up in the shadows when the glare disappears. It's like the place chooses when to reveal itself, depending on the time of day and the way the light slides through the trees. The carvings aren't obvious. They're subtle enough that you might miss them entirely unless you're looking for them, and maybe that was the intention all along. The longer you wander the gorge, the more the carvings feel like a quiet message from people who once understood this landscape differently. Maybe they carved symbols to honor natural spirits or mark important moments. Maybe they used the cliffs as a teaching place, telling stories with shapes etched into soft sandstone. Or maybe they were ordinary people passing through, carving familiar signs into the stone the way travelers carve initials into picnic tables today. Whatever the truth is, the carvings remain one of Indiana's low-key ancient mysteries, easy to overlook, easy to underestimate, but surprisingly powerful when you finally see them up close. They don't shout for attention, they whisper. They blend into the cliffs the same way history blends into the land, leaving just enough behind to make you curious. If you ever walk the trails and find yourself face to face with one of these carved shapes, take a moment, let your eyes adjust, trace the lines with your fingertips. Imagine the hands that made them and the lives that unfolded in this quiet gorge long before the modern trail markers went up. The carvings don't tell the full story, but they offer a glimpse, and sometimes that's enough to feel the weight of the past pressing gently against the present. The Twin Mounds Enigma of Vincennes. If you head toward the western edge of Vincennes, not far from the gentle bends of the Wabash River, you'll find a pair of earthen rises that don't quite match the surrounding landscape. They're subtle, almost modest, and if you didn't know what you were looking at, you might mistake them for natural hills. Locals call them the Twin Mounds. They sit close together, like two silent sentinels watching the river valley below. Their shape and placement suggest intention, not chance. And once you start digging into their history, or trying to, you realize just how little we actually know. The Twin Mounds have been part of the landscape longer than anyone alive can remember. Early settlers noted them in their journals. Some described them as remarkably even or unnaturally paired. That's not the kind of language you use for random bumps in the earth. These early accounts talk about the mounds as if they were already recognized landmarks. Even back then, people used them as orientation points when traveling through the region, long before roads cut through the land. But here's where the mystery begins. No one ever recorded who built them or what purpose they once served. There's no official excavation, no detailed archaeological report, no well-dated artifacts that tell a clear story. Compared to some of Indiana's better-known mound sites, Angel Mounds or the Anderson earthworks, the Twin Mounds barely appear in academic literature. They seem to sit in a strange in-between space, important enough to be remembered but not fully studied. Their shape offers the first clue. If you stand between them, one rising on your left, the other on your right, you notice something interesting. They're almost the same height, with similar slopes and rounded tops. That kind of symmetry usually points to human construction. Nature doesn't often create matching mounds side by side with nearly identical proportions. Some people believe they were built by a group related to the Middle Woodland cultures, possibly connected to the broader Hopewell network that stretched across the Ohio Valley. The Hopewell were known for building paired mounds and arranging earthworks in patterns that lined up with celestial events. Other researchers suggest the mounds could be even older, maybe part of a pre-Hopewell culture whose identity is mostly lost to time. Without excavation, all anyone can do is compare the shapes to other known sites. Local stories add another layer. There's an old tale that indigenous groups used the twin mounds as a kind of observation platform. Some versions say they watched the river from atop the mounds, tracking seasonal changes, or monitoring animals moving through the floodplain. Others say the mounds served a ceremonial purpose, two raised places where certain rituals were performed in tandem, perhaps marking dual forces like sun and moon, life and death, or summer and winter. Then there's a more dramatic story, one that pops up in Vincennes from time to time. It claims the mounds are the burial sites of two high-status individuals, maybe leaders, maybe spiritual figures. The idea of paired burial mounds isn't unusual in the Midwest. Some cultures built them to represent partnership, lineage, or balance. But the truth is, we simply don't know what lies beneath the twin mounds, because no one has ever opened them up to find out. What we do know is that the location wasn't chosen by accident. The mounds sit near a gentle rise overlooking the river, giving anyone on top a clear line of sight for miles. Before modern development, this would have been a strategic vantage point. You could see approaching boats, changes in water level, or groups traveling through the valley. Even today, if you climb to the top, you feel that sense of openness, the kind that makes you understand why someone might have picked this spot for something important. Some researchers believe the mounds align with certain solar events. It's difficult to prove since trees and buildings now block much of the long-distance horizon. But older residents claim that in the mid-1900s, before so much development went up, the sunrise at certain times of year appeared directly between the two mounds when viewed from a specific angle down the valley. That's the kind of alignment you see in ceremonial earthworks across the Midwest, where ancient builders paid close attention to the sky. But one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the twin mounds isn't their purpose. It's their silence in the historical record. Vincennes is one of the oldest European settlements in the Midwest, with well-preserved diaries, military reports, church records, and survey maps. You'd expect the mounds to show up in those documents in detail. Instead, you mostly find passing mentions. A note here, a brief reference there. Nobody ever seemed to take the time to study them, even though they were clearly important to the indigenous groups who lived in the region long before the French arrived. That absence of documentation makes people wonder if the mounds were already considered sacred or off-limits even in the 1700s. Some stories suggest the local tribes didn't want settlers disturbing the mounds. Whether that's true or not, the lack of early excavation might actually be why the twin mounds survived, as well as they have. Many other ancient sites were destroyed or heavily altered during farming and expansion. These mounds, for whatever reason, escaped that fate. If you visit the twin mounds today, you feel a calm that's hard to explain. The ground is soft and quiet, and even though they're not tall, standing on top feels different from standing anywhere else nearby. You're elevated just enough to feel separated from the noise around you. On certain mornings, when fog from the Wabash Valley creeps up the slope, the mounds almost look like islands floating in white. That imagery sticks with people. It makes the place feel older than it is, older than the town, older than the river settlements, older than the records that ignored them. Some hikers say they feel watched there, not in a creepy way, just aware that the place holds memory. You look around and imagine what this valley looked like 1,000 years ago. No roads, no houses, just forest and river and sky. If the mounds were ceremonial, you picture gatherings around them, firelight flickering against the earth, chants or drums echoing off the nearby trees. If they were burial sites, you imagine the people who came here to honor their leaders and how the mounds represented continuity, not loss. There's another detail people often overlook. The mounds sit close enough together that from above they resemble a pair of eyes or two halves of a single larger concept. Some researchers think the design may have symbolized duality, something deeply important in many indigenous belief systems. You see this idea across the continent, twin structures representing balance, harmony, or opposing forces working together. Again, there's no proof, but the symbolism fits. Because the mounds haven't been excavated, they've avoided the disruption that can sometimes erase the very mystery that makes a site special. Once a mound is opened and analyzed, the scientific answers can be fascinating, but they can also flatten the imagination. The twin mounds remain in that unique space where physical history meets a lack of documentation, creating room for the unknown. In the present day, the area around the mounds has grown up. Houses, roads, and businesses fill what used to be open ground. but the mounds still sit quietly at the edge, protected, respected, and largely undisturbed. The soil is firm underfoot, the grass thick in the summer, and the silence deeper than you'd expect for a site so close to town. If you visit on a quiet evening, the sun drops low over the Wabash and turns the earth gold. The mounds cast shadows that stretch long across the ground, merging slightly as the light fades. Watching that happen feels like watching an old ritual happen on its own, one the builders may have seen thousands of times. In a way, the twin mounds are exactly what ancient mysteries should be, impressive enough to raise questions, intact enough to feel sacred, but quiet enough that you never quite get a complete answer. They sit on the edge of modern life, reminders of a world that existed long before Vincennes appeared on a map. Nobody alive knows who built them, why they built them, or how these two identical shapes became part of the valley's memory. But the mounds remain, steady and patient, still carrying a story that hasn't been told yet.